In the heart of a bustling African city, where modernity clashed with tradition, a young woman's fate was sealed in a way she never expected. Adeola, a vibrant and ambitious woman, had always dreamed of choosing her own path. But fate had other plans. Adeola had worked hard to build a life of independence. She was educated, smart, and determined to marry for love. But her parents, deeply rooted in tradition, believed otherwise. To them, marriage was about family honor, not love. One evening, Adeola was called into the family meeting. Her father's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Adeola, you are of marriageable age. It is time for you to settle down. We have chosen a good man for you." Her heart pounded. A good man? What did that mean? She had never even heard of him before. Kunle. That was the name of the man she was supposed to marry. A man she had never met. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the photograph. But when she saw the image, her breath caught in her throat. Kunle was disabled, her father continued, his voice unwavering. "He is from a respected family. He will take care of you. This discussion is over." Adeola's world shattered in that moment. She wasn't given a choice. She wasn't even asked how she felt. That night, as she sat in her room, tears welled in her eyes. Was this really her fate? To be forced into a marriage with a man she didn't love? She wanted to escape. She wanted to fight. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same again. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the city. But for Adeola, the world felt cold and unwelcoming. She had barely slept. Her mind raced with thoughts of the life being forced upon her. Her best friend, Eshe, the one person she could confide in, had come over as soon as she heard the news. "Adeola, you can't just let them do this to you." Eshe's voice was sharp with disbelief. Adeola sighed, shaking her head. "What choice? Do I have, Eshe?" "My father has spoken. You know what that means?" Eshe wasn't one to accept defeat. "Then run away. You are smart. You have a job. You can start over somewhere else." Adeola let out a bitter laugh. "And bring shame to my family. My mother would never survive the disgrace." Her heart ached at the thought. As much as she hated this, she couldn't bear to see her mother suffer because of her choices. Adeola buried her face in her hands. She felt trapped. Her whole life, she had been taught to obey, to respect tradition. But was she supposed to sacrifice her happiness for it? Then a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. "Adeola," Tunde's voice was low. "I heard Baba talking last night. He said you'll be married by the end of the week." Adeola's heart nearly stopped. The end of the week? She had barely processed the shock of the engagement, and now she had only days before she became Kunle's wife. She had thought she had time to convince her father, time to think. But time was running out. Eshe grabbed her hands. "Adeola, listen to me. If you don't act now, you will regret this for the rest of your life." Adeola swallowed hard, fear creeping up her spine. Did she really have the courage to fight back? Or was she about to walk into a life she never wanted? The week was slipping through Adeola's fingers like grains of sand. Each passing day felt like a countdown to her doom. No matter how much she tried to fight back, her father's decision was final. Eshe had tried to convince her to rebel, but it was no use. Running away wasn't an option. Confronting her father was even worse. She was trapped, and she knew it. As she passed through the marketplace, the smell of roasted plantains and spiced meat filled the air. But today, the vibrant atmosphere of the city couldn't lift her spirits. The vendor, an old woman named Mama Bisi, had known Adeola since childhood. "Ah, my daughter, why do you look like a lost soul?" she asked in a warm but knowing tone. Adeola forced a smile. It's nothing, Mama Bisi. The woman chuckled, shaking her head. A woman only wears that look when she is being forced into something she doesn't want. Adeola hesitated. Was it that obvious? She had been keeping her pain to herself, but somehow, this old woman could see right through her. Tell me, child, Mama Bisi continued. Who are they forcing you to marry? Adeola's throat tightened. His name is Kunle. I don't know him. And he's disabled. Mama Bisi stopped slicing. She looked up at Adeola, her expression unreadable. And because of that, you do not want him. Adeola shook her head quickly. No, it's not that. It's just, I had dreams, Mama Bisi. I wanted to marry for love, not because my father demands it. Mama Bisi sighed, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Sometimes, my daughter, what we think is a curse might be a blessing, in disguise. Have you met Kunle? Have you spoken to him? Adeola shook her head. No, I don't even know what kind of person he is. Mama Bisi nodded knowingly. Then before you curse your fate, perhaps you should first meet the man you are about to marry. For the first time, a small thought crept into Adeola's mind. What if she had been judging the situation too quickly? She needed to see Kunle, not as the man her father forced upon her, but as the man he truly was. Would that change anything? She was about to find out. Adeola stood outside a modest yet well-kept home, her heart pounding against her chest. This was it. She was about to meet Kunle, the man she was supposed to marry. A stranger. She had spent the whole night thinking about what Mama Bisi said. Before you curse your fate, perhaps you should first meet the man you are about to marry. Maybe she had been too quick to judge. Maybe meeting Kunle would confirm her fears, or change them. The door creaked open, and standing there was an older woman, Kunle's mother, Mama Folake. Ah, you must be Adeola, Mama Folake said, a small smile forming on her lips. Come in, my dear. Adeola stepped inside, her hands clenched at her sides. She glanced around the cozy living room where family portraits lined the walls. Then she saw him, Kunle. He was nothing like what she had imagined. She had expected someone frail, weak, and pitiful. But instead, Kunle sat tall in his wheelchair, his dark skin glowing under the sunlight filtering through the window. He closed his book and turned to her, a smirk playing at his lips. So, you're the woman I'm being forced to marry? Adeola stiffened. I could say the same about you. Kunle chuckled, shaking his head. Well, at least you're honest. Adeola didn't know what she expected, but it wasn't this. Kunle wasn't bitter or broken. There was confidence in the way he spoke, a quiet strength that made her uneasy. So tell me, Adeola, Kunle said, tilting his head. Do you want this marriage? Adeola swallowed. Does it matter? Our fathers have already decided. Kunle sighed, running a hand over his neatly trimmed beard. I don't believe in living a life of regret. If you don't want this, you should speak now. Adeola was taken aback. She had expected resistance, but instead, Kunle was giving her a choice. Was this a test? She looked into his eyes and, for the first time, saw something unexpected. A man who was just as trapped as she was. Adeola's breath caught in her throat. She had come here expecting a weak, helpless man. Instead, Kunle sat before her, challenging her with his words, forcing her to confront her own choices. Kunle leaned back in his wheelchair, his gaze unwavering. You don't have to do this, Adeola. If you're looking for a way out, say the word, and I'll make it happen. Adeola frowned. What do you mean? Kunle smirked. My father may be forcing this marriage, but I am not powerless. If you truly want to walk away, I'll convince him to call it off." She studied him carefully. Why was he so willing to let her go? Adeola folded her arms. "And what about you? Do you want this marriage?" Kunle chuckled, shaking his head. "Want? No, but I accept it. Unlike you, I know that sometimes life gives us what we don't ask for." Adeola flinched at his words. He had said it so easily, but there was something deeper hidden in his voice. Kunle sighed. "Look, Adeola, I won't force you to stay. But if you do, at least try to see me as a man, not a burden." Adeola felt a pang of guilt. Was that what he thought? That she saw him as a burden? She looked away, struggling with her thoughts. She had been so focused on herself that she never considered what Kunle must be going through. Mama Folek smiled warmly. "Adeola, my dear, why don't you stay for dinner? Get to know Kunle, even just for a little while." Adeola hesitated. She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away and pretend this was all a bad dream. But something inside her whispered, "Stay." She turned back to Kunle, who raised an eyebrow, waiting for her decision. Then she took a deep breath and said, "All right, I'll stay for dinner." Adeola didn't know what she was doing, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a marriage forced on her. This was the start of something unexpected. Dinner was different from what Adeola had expected. She thought it would be tense, filled with awkward silence and forced conversations. But instead there was warmth, laughter, and something else. Comfort. Mama Folek had a way of making everything feel natural. She talked about her late husband, about Kunle's childhood, and even about the time Kunle had climbed a mango tree and refused to come down for hours. Adeola found herself laughing before she even realized it. Kunle chuckled, shaking his head. "You're making me sound like a stubborn child, Mama." Mama Folek winked. "Because you were one." She had assumed that Kunle would be bitter about his disability, resentful of the world. But he wasn't. He carried himself with pride, with confidence. He wasn't looking for pity. And for the first time, Adeola wondered, had she been wrong about him? "Adeola, my dear," Mama Folek said suddenly. "What do you love to do?" Adeola looked up, surprised by the question. I love fashion, designing clothes." Kunle raised an eyebrow. "You're a designer." She nodded hesitantly. "I want to be, but my father never supported it. He says it's not a real profession." Mama Folek clicked her tongue. "Nonsense. Fashion is art, and art is power," Kunle smirked. "So you can sew?" Adeola nodded and Kunle leaned back in his chair. "Then I guess you and I have something in common." Adeola frowned. "What do you mean?" Kunle chuckled. "I run a business. I design and create adaptive clothing, fashion for people with disabilities." Adeola's eyes widened. "You design clothes?" Kunle nodded. "I started years ago, after my accident. I realized how difficult it was to find stylish, comfortable clothes for people like me, so I created my own brand." Adeola had thought she was marrying a man who would be a burden. Instead, she was sitting across from someone who defied expectations, who built something out of nothing. For the first time, she saw Kunle not as the man she was forced to marry, but as someone worth knowing. And that scared her. Adeola barely touched her food. She couldn't stop staring at Kunle, as if seeing him for the first time, a man who had built something for himself. Despite the odds, she had spent so much time resenting this marriage, thinking she was being punished. But was she? Kunle wiped his mouth with a napkin, then leaned forward. You look surprised. Adeola blinked, realizing he had caught her staring. I am. I mean, I didn't expect this. Kunle smirked. You thought I was useless, didn't you? She stiffened, but before she could deny it, he chuckled. It's okay. Most people do. They see the wheelchair and assume my life is over. Adeola hesitated, then said quietly, But it's not. Kunle's smile softened. No, it's not Mama Folake beamed. You two are more alike than you realize. Both of you are dreamers. Both of you refuse to be caged. Adeola swallowed. But was that true? Because unlike Kunle, she had let herself be trapped. By fear, by tradition, by the expectations of others. Mama Folake stood up, collecting the empty plates. Kunle, why don't you show Adeola your workshop? Kunle's eyes twinkled. That's not a bad idea. Adeola's heart pounded. She wasn't sure she was ready to see more of his world, because it was making her question everything about her own. But before she could protest, Kunle spun his wheelchair toward the hallway. Come on, future wife. Let me impress you. As she stepped into Kunle's workshop, she felt like she had entered another world. The room was filled with fabric rolls, sewing machines, and unfinished designs pinned to the walls. There were sketches of jackets with magnetic buttons, trousers with hidden zippers, and stylish tunics that accommodated mobility challenges. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a revolution. Adeola's breath hitched. You created all this? Kunle grinned. Surprised. Again? She was. Because for the first time, she wasn't seeing Kunle as a man in a wheelchair. She was seeing him as a visionary, and it terrified her. Adeola ran her fingers over the smooth fabric of a half-stitched jacket, her mind racing. Every design in Kunle's workshop was crafted with thought, with purpose. It wasn't just clothing. It was freedom stitched into fabric. She turned to him, still in awe. How did you even think of all this? Kunle smirked, wheeling himself closer. Necessity, Adeola. When you live in a world that isn't built for you, you either suffer or you innovate. His words hit her like a wave. She had spent years believing her life was controlled by others. But here was Kunle, a man society had already written off, who had refused to be a victim. Kunle chuckled, breaking the silence. What? No sarcastic remark? I expected you to insult my sewing skills or something. Adeola scoffed. Oh, trust me, I would, if these weren't so impressive. Kunle grinned. Ah, so I've won you over? She folded her arms. I didn't say that. Kunle rolled his chair to a wooden shelf, pulling out a small sketchbook. Come here. Adeola hesitated before stepping closer. He handed her the book, and as she flipped through it, she saw something that made her breath catch. Kunle tapped the page. I designed this last year, but I could never get it quite right. Maybe you could help? Adeola's head snapped up. Me? Kunle nodded. You're a designer, aren't you? Unless you were lying at dinner. Her fingers tightened around the book. She had never actually worked on a real design before, only dreamed about it. Kunle leaned back. Think of it as a challenge. You're free to walk away if you're scared. Adeola narrowed her eyes. I'm not scared. Kunle raised an eyebrow. Then prove it. Adeola exhaled. She didn't know what was happening between them, but for the first time she wasn't looking for an escape. She was looking for a reason to stay. For the first time since the wedding was announced, Adeola wasn't thinking about running away. Instead, she was staring at the sketch in her hands, her mind racing with possibilities. What if we changed the neckline? Adeola murmured. And used a wrap design instead of buttons. That way it's easier to wear. Kunle's eyes lit up. Now you're thinking like a designer. Adeola felt a flicker of excitement in her chest. For years she had buried her passion, convinced it would never be more than a dream. But here, in this workshop, with this man, she thought she would hate. Something was changing. Kunle chuckled. You know, I expected you to be stubborn, but I didn't expect you to actually be good at this. Adeola rolled her eyes. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Kunle smirked. Take it however you want. The moment stretched between them. Warm and unexpected. Kunle wasn't the burden she thought he would be. If anything, he was lifting her up, pushing her towards something she had been too afraid to reach for. And that realization terrified her. She cleared her throat. It's late. I should go to bed. Kunle didn't argue. All right, but don't think this conversation is over. You owe me a redesign. Adeola hesitated, then nodded. We'll see. As Adeola lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was shifting in a way she never expected. She had walked into this marriage believing it was a prison sentence. But now, she wasn't sure if she wanted to escape. Adeola lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in confusion. Why did Kunle feel different now? She had spent so much time convincing herself that this marriage was a punishment, that she was being forced into a life she didn't want. But tonight had changed something. She sat up abruptly, shaking her head. No. This wasn't real. She wasn't supposed to admire him. She wasn't supposed to feel drawn to him. But she couldn't deny the truth. Kunle wasn't just some disabled man she had been forced to marry. He was strong, smart, unshaken by the world's pity. And that scared her. The next morning, Adeola tried to act normal. She dressed quickly and headed to the kitchen, where Mama Folake was already preparing breakfast. Kunle was seated by the table sipping tea, looking completely unbothered, as if last night hadn't changed anything. But for Adeola, everything felt different. Mama Folake turned and smiled. Adeola, my dear, come and eat. Adeola nodded stiffly, sitting across from Kunle. She tried not to meet his eyes, but he noticed. Of course, he noticed. Kunle smirked, leaning slightly forward. You're acting strange this morning. Had a bad dream? Adeola frowned. No, I slept fine. Kunle chuckled. Must be something else then. His teasing tone sent a strange warmth through her, but she quickly pushed it away. Mama Folake set down a plate of steaming akara and pap, smiling at the two of them. Kunle, have you told her yet? Adeola's eyes narrowed. Told me what? Kunle wiped his mouth with a napkin before answering. We are visiting the marketplace today, you and I, together. Adeola blinked. What? Why? Kunle shrugged. I need materials for my new designs, and since you're apparently my new creative partner, you're coming with me. Adeola's stomach flipped. The marketplace? With him? In public? The marketplace buzzed with life. Colorful stalls lined the streets, merchants shouting their best prices, the rich aroma of roasted plantains and spicy suya filling the air. Adeola walked beside Kunle, her shoulders tense. She wasn't used to walking with him in public, especially not when all eyes seemed to be on them. People whispered as they passed. Is that the girl who was forced to marry the cripple? Such a shame. She's so beautiful. She must be suffering. Adeola's hands curled into fists. Their pity made her stomach twist. But when she looked at Kunle, he didn't seem to care. Kunle led the way to a fabric stall, his fingers brushing over a bolt of deep blue ankara. What do you think? he asked, glancing up at her. Adeola barely heard him. Her mind was still on the stairs, the whispers, the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on her. Kunle sighed, shaking his head. Ignore them, Adeola. She blinked. How? They think I'm miserable. They think... Kunle smirked. Let them think what they want. Their words don't change reality. Adeola exhaled sharply. That's easy for you to say. Kunle raised an eyebrow. Is it? She swallowed hard. She had spent so much time feeling trapped in this marriage, but now she was realizing something strange. Kunle was freer than she had ever been. He didn't live for people's approval. He didn't care about their whispers. He lived for himself. Kunle tapped the fabric again. Now, are you going to help me pick this? Or are you going to waste the whole day worrying about people who don't matter? Adeola huffed, but this time there was a hint of a smile on her lips. Fine, but I think we need something bolder. Kunle grinned. Now that's the spirit. As they moved to the next stall, Adeola felt something shift inside her. She had walked into the marketplace feeling ashamed. But now she was walking beside her husband, with her head held high. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Adeola and Kunle made their way back home from the marketplace. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was comfortable. Kunle's hands rested on the wheels of his chair, his pace steady, while Adeola carried the fabrics they had picked together. She never thought she'd say it, but today had been nice. The whispers, the stares, they had still been there, but Kunle had shown her something far more important. People will always talk, but it's up to you whether their words define you. And, for once, she had chosen not to let them. As they approached the house, Mama Folake was waiting for them. Her arms crossed. She looked at the two of them, then at the fabrics in Adeola's hands. Then, to Adeola's surprise, she smiled. It looks like this marriage isn't as doomed as I thought. Adeola opened her mouth to protest, but then she didn't, because the truth was, Mama Folake wasn't wrong. That night, as Adeola sat in her room, running her fingers over the fabric, a thought crossed her mind. What if I actually gave this a chance? Not just the designs, not just the business, but the marriage. She had spent so much time fighting it, fearing it, trying to escape it. But Kunle had never once tried to change her. He only ever challenged her to be better. A knock on the door made her jump. Adeola? Kunle's voice. She hesitated, then walked over and opened the door. He looked at her, his usual teasing smirk replaced by something softer. You never told me. Did you have a good time today? Adeola met his gaze, her heart thudding. For once, she didn't have to force her answer. Yes, she admitted, her voice steady. I did. Kunle smiled. Good. Then let's do it again tomorrow. Adeola exhaled a laugh, shaking her head. You're impossible. Kunle chuckled. And yet, here you are. For the first time since this marriage began, Adeola wasn't thinking about running away. She was thinking about what could be. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare her.